article in the Advertiser in Adelaide yesterday. I read it on the plane on the way over. The title is "Nation at Risk from Religious Fanatics." Now, what you're suggesting is people get back to their roots, but this article... What was that?
Which nation?
Yes, indeed, which nation? Australia risks becoming a nation of ethnic enclaves who unknowingly buy meat slaughtered in the name of Allah. Apparently Liberal MPs have warned. And going on, Liberal frontbencher Mitch Fifield warned of the danger of parallel societies developing, as has occurred in Europe, where hardline Muslim groups preach Sharia law rather than Western values. And Corey Bernardi is saying Australia needs to avoid mistakes of countries which have allowed religious fanatics to prosper. Antony, do you have any response? It's kind of questions without notice, but any response to that?
I've got a very strong response. I mean, what's ironic in the extreme with individuals like that is that they incredibly are supposedly supporting human rights for all those poor, oppressed Muslims, and yet those two particularly have spent a lot of time in Israel, and they go to a country like that which is framed as a wonderful democracy, but in fact oppresses Arabs and Palestinians in the name of religion and democracy and freedom. So I think there is and this is very, very common, of a lot of politicians in the West, in America, in Australia, in England, who talk about this supposed fear of enclaves, of ethnic gangs. And yes, there are issues of integration here and there, and that's a given. But at the same time, to me, one has no credibility when you talk about that if you have an incredible blind spot about either supporting Israeli occupation, or for that matter, a war in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere else. I mean, they are fundamentally opposed to each other. Now, you could argue that they support the Iraq war because it was liberating those poor Iraqi women or Afghan women. Well, if you speak to the Iraqis and Afghans now, 10 years on, roughly, even when you spoke to them in the last decade, the vast majority will say life ain't that great. And it wasn't that, liberating women had nothing to do with the war. It's irrelevant. It was the argument that was used by regimes to back it. So I guess my response to people like that would be spend a bit of time outside Kabul, outside the bubble, and then talk to me about ethnic gangs. And
Jane?
It's tending to disguise racism, I think, but there is something really interesting about how we are able to think in a completely contradictory way. Australia actually is in danger of building kind of religious silos, and we do it through private schooling by dividing our children up, not just by religious basis, though we do that. We have Islamic schools, Jewish schools, Catholic schools, fundamentalist Christian schools, exclusive Brethren schools, and yes, Scientology schools, because of course that's a religion now. And we also have schools for our brightest kids, schools for our good sports kids, schools for our drama kids, schools for our rich kids, schools for our poor kids, schools for our boys, and schools for our girls. Well, that's siloing. That's making sure our kids don't actually meet one another. That's one of my greatest complaints about religious influence in Australia, is the appalling impact it is having on our comprehensive public school system, which is now becoming a school system of last resort for the very poor. Cardinal Pell has acknowledged that Catholic schools no longer educate most poor Catholics. Public schools educate most poor Catholics because Catholic schools have become middle-class schools. Religion, if that alone is all it had to answer for in Australia, has an awful lot to answer for there.
And yet, even as you're introducing that, you're saying it's not only the religious boundaries that are siloing, there are other things. So it's not just divisive enclaves based on religion.
No, but when you do it with religion, you do it with divine kind of backing. You bring a big stick. Now, the best I ever have as an atheist, and the best Antony ever has as an atheist, is a well-informed opinion. That's as high as we can go. We haven't got anything else. We can't then bring out the big stick of, but my God agrees with me, and that's why you have to do what I say.
It'd be silly to suggest that. I mean, I agree with quite a lot of what you're saying there, but it'd be silly to suggest that the only reason people go into those systems is because of some.
Oh, they don't go into those systems for those religious. And in fact, I would say they're doing it for no religious reason at all. A lot of them are lying through their teeth about their religious
to get in.
Thing to get in. But religion is co-opting that status-seeking and fear amongst parents to create cultural silos, if you like.
Would it be inappropriate now to come back to something you said a minute ago about oppression of women? Can I say something about that? I think I acknowledge what you're saying. I agree largely with you, and I think there's been terrible oppression of women by individual churches, individual Christians over centuries. And we're working our way through that. I don't agree that it is, though, at the core of what the religion's about. And I think if we go back to the early centuries of Christianity, it's very important to do that, because that is, it's emanating from that core teaching of Jesus and then the early church, which was undeniably enormously popular for women. Women flocked to the church.
To that bloody original sin story then? Why did they stick the New Testament
Well, I think you need a more careful
on the Old
reading
Testament,
of
which says women need to be ashamed of just the fact that they are women, they caused all the evil.
It's not how I read the early documents of that, or the Genesis story. What I will say, though, is that women flocked to the church because it gave them an entirely new status. They were regarded as full humanity because they were made in the image of God. Churches taught their people, and this was a new thing, that you weren't allowed to just put babies out to die. That would happen to girls mostly. They said that's not on, because they are made in the image of God. They said we have to protect widows and orphans. And I'll get to that in a minute. There was enormous strength for women, and it's one of the reasons. Rodney Stark, the sociologist, talks about this. He said one of the reasons it grew. Yes, there are. That grew so quickly was because it was so attractive to women. It was mocked as the religion of slaves and women. And so we have to account for that. We have to go back and go, why was it so attractive to women? And it might sound like I'm now denying all the subsequent mistreatment, and I'm not at all. And my wife would be joining you in a lot of that.
In which case, Simon, I think Jane's question is valid. So what happened?
Yeah.
Now, if we look...
It got mixed up with power.